From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Coming up today, the weekly grain market segment with K-State's Dan O'Brien. Dan looks ahead to the USDA's next grain supply and demand and crop production reports, both coming out next Tuesday. What market watchers think those reports will have to say, and how the markets might respond to them. Then K-State's Mike Stamm will report on the condition of the Kansas canola crop coming out of the successive rounds of hard freezes back in mid-April. He talks about assessing freeze damage, noting that the cold tolerance of canola has allowed it to recover relatively well in a number of locations in the state. And on Kansas agricultural weather, Mary Knapp checks in with us. Further ahead on this Agriculture Today. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. You're listening to Agriculture Today. Good to have you aboard right here for our segment on the grain market trends to start off this Friday edition. Along with us is Dan O'Brien, grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension. And Dan, we're going to key on, first of all here, something that for once is relatively normal, given everything that's been out of the ordinary the last several weeks, and that is the forthcoming release of a USDA World Agricultural Supply and Demand report focusing on grain supply and demand here. Projections are in on what those numbers have to say. This may well be a report that does garner a fair amount of attention, might it not?
Well, the May 12th WASDE report and crop production reports, there's this long unanswered question, long as in months, unanswered question of the size of the corn and soybean crops, how that might be affected by the USDA's resurvey of the northern states. They resurveyed 5 states for corn, 3 for soybeans, and it's hard to, I'll make a statement that I'll probably be wrong on. It's hard to see them going higher on production, given all that was in the field and ear droppage and harvest challenges that they'd had in a number of those northern states, especially for the corn crop, as it was the later of the two that had harvest issues. And you saw pictures all the way through February when we had snow in the fields of people finally on March 1st saying, I finally got my corn crop harvest done, and that's after a lot was already either had fallen or had decayed in some way. So still, it's probably judicious to think in terms of, well, gosh, is it 100 million? Is it 200 million bushels, something like that? If it comes in 400 million, that's probably the surprise. Although for those that are living that up there, that was a hard-fought late harvest, still we'll have to see. So that's probably the first thing to look at, to see if the U.S. corn crop in particular, and perhaps the soybean crop, will be adjusted back some. Because that would come right straight into the old crop 2019-20 corn and soybean supply-demand balance sheets. So there's the possibility of somewhat lower production and a tightening up of stocks coming out of the old crop marketing year. The big challenge, I think, in looking at, we're talking first about corn and soybeans, and we'll come to wheat. But for corn and soybeans, to keep in mind that the USDA is going to take the planted acreage numbers, unless they go way off the script, they'll probably stay with 97 million acres of corn being planted and 90, I think it's 94, about 94 or so. To double check that on the soybeans to be planted.
Those are the planting intentions numbers from March?
Yeah, those are at the end of March. So those are the numbers that came out of the prospective plantings report. And the next time, again, unless USDA does something extraordinary, out of their normal mode, they'll come back and revisit those numbers in the acreage report at the end of June. So frankly, my personal opinion, I wish they would. I wish they'd go check it, because it'll cast a pall of uncertainty over the numbers that we're going to be looking at that the USDA is projecting for this coming marketing year, the 2021 one, all the way out until we get those new numbers. The general thought in the market is that instead of 97, is it 94 million acres of corn being planted? Is it 92? With all that's happened in the corn market, as farmers have gone forth, there's a lot of thought of that happening. What's worked against that, against the cutback in corn acres, is the tremendous planting weather. Well, of course, it's been tremendous planting weather because it's been dry. So just a complete opposite so far of last year's situation in terms of having to deal with wet. And by the way, we don't begrudge anybody getting their crop in, but these are pretty dry conditions. And so I would hope once farmers get their crops in that then we would get a requisite moisture for those crops to be successful. And if they are, the USDA out of their February Outlook conference projected corn yields at 177, 178 bushels per acre. Well, what they projected in the February meeting was 179, basically 178.8. Trade expecting just about 1 bushel less than that. Still, at least 174 to that 178, 179 the USDA was talking about. If that comes in on these acres, then, it's just algebra. Planted acres minus the adjustment for harvested times yield, something about 15.7, 15.8 billion bushels. And there's some estimates as high as just underneath 16. And of course, if that comes in as a number in the corn supply demand balance sheet, then you end up with ending stocks projections, which are north of 3 billion bushels. The highest trade estimate coming into this is 4.3 billion. The lowest was 2.6, 2.7. The average, this is for corn, for the 2021 marketing year, the one that starts on September 1, basically 3.4 billion bushels. And you and I talked about this in the last several weeks, plugging that type of the size of a crop. If we had great usage, well, we deal with that. We'd still be about 2 billion bushels, 2.5, something like that. Well, but with the worries and fears over ethanol usage and livestock feed usage, numbers that could come about because of problems in the livestock industry, there's the fear that large supplies and just so at best demand will bring us these high numbers. And from there, we wrestle with prices to see, do we stay above $3? And if we don't, where do we go? Is it $2.50 or is it closer on down to the loan rate?
How about the soybean side of the ledger, Dan? What are the trade expectations there?
For soybean yields, the trade expects the same number as the USDA said in February, just under 50 bushels per acre. Production of 4.1 billion bushels, that'd be down just a little bit from what the USDA projected before. With that, it's interesting. They're anticipating still some pretty good usage for beans. So, amen. The USDA in their previous meetings was looking at about 480 million bushels of ending stocks for soybeans. Trades coming in about 50, 60, below that about 430. So things aren't looking quite as bad there on soybeans. But either way, we're so at the winds of these coronavirus affected world markets that it has led us to a lot of pessimism for corn and for soybeans.
Well, Dan, the USDA will also weigh in with its projections on the winter wheat crop, or the wheat crop broadly. What is the thinking there as we go into that report?
Well, that report, we'll be getting these numbers on May the 12th, and it'll be measuring conditions around the 1st of May, and we'll have either have had or have coming a freeze. So it's another situation where will the expectations that are given in that report match up with the new reality on the ground? I think it's wise for us. We've learned over hard experience to not try to get out in front of our agronomic brethren. Again, Romulo Lolato, Lucas Haig, Jeannie Falk, everybody there in KSU agronomy, in terms of actually figuring out what the damage was on the wheat crop and where our numbers will come in. But that said, the market in their pre-report expectations given that the hard red crop last year was about 833 million bushels, they've got a range of from 678 on the low side, the trade does, up to 739. So there's already expectations that we're going lower by at least 100, 150 million bushels. From what I hear of what our agronomist colleagues are talking about, we have freeze damage in some parts of the west, southwest, northwest, dry conditions, really almost as much concern about how dry things are in parts of the state, particularly southwest Kansas, that between freeze and drought, we've a very uncertain picture. That's a polite thing to say. We have a very uncertain picture about where wheat's going. Interesting that compared to where we were 2 weeks ago, the wheat market, wheat futures, we were well over $5 before. Now we're $4.70, $4.80 now for where the lead futures are at, somewhat lower. The market's still going back and forth in terms of wheat export possibilities, concerns, disappointments, etc. The latest numbers for the week ending April the 30th, about 21 million bushels of actual shipments. And as we wrap up this market year coming to the end of May, basically a month away, we're about 98% of the way to the USDA's projection of 985 million bushels, with about 48 out of 52 weeks done, about 92% of the time there. So it'll be a horse race to the end. One or two key purchases could go, and it could make a lot of difference. But as of right now, it looks like we'd be coming in a little bit under the USDA's projection. But that said, there's a lot of things roiling around in the world markets, particularly the Black Sea region. Are they dry or are they not? Are they going to protect their own domestic stocks or not? All that's happening. And so it just seems like a market that, well, I think it's telling that we're having this up and down, and we're doing it between 550 and 480. We're not doing it between, 425 and 325. So there's something afoot in concern in the world wheat market. And just of late, though, there's been more of a pessimistic tone, and that doesn't mean that surprises couldn't happen to give us something better later. And here we have harvest just around the corner.
Right. Again, the USDA coming out this coming Tuesday, May the 12th, with its latest grain supply and demand report. Dan, as always, thanks for the comments.
Thanks, Eric. Take care.
Dan O'Brien is along with us each Friday on Agriculture Today, grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension. You're listening to the K-State Radio Network.
A social distancing tip.
Keeping your distance from others is important in slowing the spread of coronavirus. So here are some fun things to do alone. Read a book, take a walk, unpack your suitcase from that trip you took last September, paint a self-portrait, catch up on a TV series, do a puzzle. Remember, we should all stay home to lower the risk for everyone. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Agriculture Today continues. Now to get an update on the state of the canola crop in Kansas. And as we've been talking about concerning winter wheat, canola, too, has gone through its trials and tribulations with a string of freezing temperatures over multiple nights in Kansas in mid-April. We've brought by Mike Stamm. Mike, of course, is the canola breeder here at Kansas State University. Mike, before we get an idea of how canola is doing out there currently, let's go back to the pre-freeze, if you will, before the middle part of April. How was the Kansas canola crop looking at that point?
Eric, I think it was looking pretty good from my perspective, especially in terms of overwintering. It was a fairly mild winter this year compared to the previous year. But we still tended to have some fluctuations in temperature. And as we've talked about on the show previously, those fluctuations in temperature can be challenging for canola. But I think overall, the people that have canola in the field, and from our perspective, our research plots really came through the winter okay. As the crop was starting to move from the rosette into the bolting stage, we did start to see a little bit more of this crown rot that we've been seeing the last couple of years show itself in some varieties. And I think that goes back to the fluctuating temperatures, again, where we freeze and thaw and freeze and thaw over winter. That can have some negative consequences on the crop. And so we were seeing a little bit of that. And I think some of that was driven by the drier conditions that we were having as well. The crop was under some drought stress. And when you throw canola under multiple stresses, that's when you really kind of see some of the overwintering or the stem rot kind of rear its head. So we were anticipating seeing some of that in some of the producers' fields. But, overall, I think the canola was actually in pretty good shape once we would pick up some moisture here.
So canola likes consistency and temperature. When mid-April came along, one has to wonder how canola fared. Again, we had night after night after night of hard freezes, not just below 32 degrees, but well into the 20s. How did canola come out of that, Mike?
It was a little bit of a mixed bag at first. As you mentioned, it was repeated nights of freezing. It wasn't just one night where we were, down to 28 degrees or whatnot. And, that's pretty common in April for canola at any growth stage to go, into, we have a night where it's down below 32 degrees. But then, it's a fairly quick recovery after that. But what was kind of unique about this situation is, as you said, it was those repeated nights of cold. Also, the range in temperatures, especially in northern Kansas where we were down into the teens even, there we've expected to see more freeze damage because we got down below 20. And typically when canola's in the reproductive stages, below 20 is kind of a critical temperature for the crop, because in other years, for instance, like 2007, when we had that Easter weekend freeze that we like to talk about, even in the central part of the state, we were well into the teens, and we lost a lot of canola that year and wheat just because it got too cold for the crop at this stage in the game. So we were anticipating severe damage in northern Kansas, and I had one grower up in Smith County that actually contacted me and said that 2 nights below 20 degrees on canola in the bolting stage was not a good situation, and he actually lost his crop because of that. However, in other parts of the state where we didn't get as cold, the canola, it definitely showed leaf burn, and we started to see some stem splitting immediately after the freeze. And then we also saw, some bud cluster loss and flower loss because of the freeze. And it looked a little bit unsightly after about the fourth night of that. So we were kind of concerned about what we might see going forward if we didn't have the right kind of conditions to get the crop to recover.
Well, let's get into the recovery prognosis here, as you've seen it the last, couple of weeks now. Again, all of this was related in great part to the growth stage when the freezes hit. But does the crop have capacity to bounce back from this fairly decently?
It really does. Canola's kind of built to take on different stresses, whether that's heat or cold, at the flowering and reproductive stage, because it's an indeterminate crop. And we've talked about this too on your shows, that you can stress it at one period of time, and then if conditions return to normal, the crop really may not skip much of a beat, and you won't see any major yield losses because of that, a freeze event, for instance. So it also kind of depends on what other stressors are there. For instance, the drought stress and the crown damage that I mentioned, if those are present, the recovery could be more challenging for the crop. Fortunately, this year, the last couple of weeks have been very mild. I had a couple of days there where we got into the 80s, but overall temperatures in the 60s and 70s, and where people were lucky, some rainfall. The rainfall and the cooler temperatures have really made for some impressive recovery in the canola that I've seen. And I'm mostly talking about our research plots, because like I said, I was concerned about the crop after, about the third or fourth night of these really hard freezes. But with these milder temperatures and some recent rainfall, the crop has added a lot of clusters. If you walk by the crop and, just kind of glanced at it, you wouldn't really even be able to tell that it went through a major freeze event. Now, if you get down in the canopy and look, you can see where, the main raceme of some plants is completely frozen off, but some of the secondary and auxiliary branches have gone ahead and taken over, basically. And so you really just see a normal looking canola canopy. So I would say that the recovery actually has been really good this year, and Mother Nature's working with us right now in some ways with these milder temperatures and the rainfall for those of us that are lucky to receive it.
So, Mike, then can that compensatory growth help the crop recover to the point where there may be only a very minor yield ding, to put it that way?
Yeah, so we always say that with canola, if you lose that main raceme, that's still primarily your most productive part of the plant. So we would anticipate if you lost the main raceme or the main stem, you're going to sustain some yield hit. But if you don't lose that main raceme, you're going to definitely see some pods and some flowers that are missing because of the freeze, but those secondary branches will take over. But then even on those racemes that had some loss, they're going to continue to flower as normal as well. So I would say if the crop looks normal and you're just finding your sporadic, lost bud cluster here and there, that you're really not going to see much of an impact overall.
And so then, unless a stand was flat out wiped out, it would be best for a producer to stick with that crop, at least for a few more weeks to assess its potential further.
Absolutely, yeah. I would say with this recent freeze event that, early on you're going to know pretty quickly whether that crop was completely decimated. When you see that happen, that crop, after a week to 10 days, you're going to see it just basically turn brown and not show any new life. In that situation, it's pretty easy to make that determination. Okay, yeah, maybe I need to go to soybean or go to sorghum. That's a pretty easy decision. It does get a little bit more difficult as, the crop progresses and starts to recover to determine just how bad that freeze event was. But again, if it looks normal, it really doesn't look like you've lost that much of the flowering buds and open flowers and pods, then for the most part, the crop is going to be fine after these freeze events.
And one last thing here, Mike, and perhaps you'll be looking at this in your test plots specifically as well, given that freeze event that the crop has endured, hopefully anyway. Are we likely to see varietal differences in response to this adverse condition?
For sure. And the simplest way to look at it is typically your earlier flowering varieties are the ones that take the biggest hit from these late spring freezes. And then those that are later to mature or later to flower, as the ones that were in bolting, for instance, when the freeze came through, they typically take less of a hit. They're not as susceptible to the freeze in that earlier growth stage, so to speak. So it's pretty easy to determine which are the earlier flowers and which are the later maturing varieties. But you have to be careful in that, for us, for instance, we don't just select the later flowering varieties because they look the best. You still got to have that selection pressure for the earlies and for the lates. So we take that into consideration, especially when we're trying to advance varieties through our program. We don't just want to select late maturity. We don't want to select just early. We got to have that balance. But we'll take into consideration anything that might look like it just handled the situation better.
Well, it's a true test of the resiliency of this crop, and by all indications, it's coming through in pretty decent shape.
At this point in time, if you've got the crop in the field and it looks like it's doing its thing, then more than likely you're going to be happy with the end result.
Well, that's good news to hear concerning the condition of canola in Kansas. Mike, as always, we appreciate the input, and we will visit once again soon. Many thanks to you.
Thank you, Eric.
Mike Stamm with us from the K-State Department of Agronomy, canola breeder at the university, with that briefing on the condition of the Kansas canola crop. And you're tuned to Agriculture Today.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128-plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local Extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network. Again, now in our 96th year of broadcast service to Kansas and the Central Plains. Now on to today's agricultural news headlines, courtesy in part of DTN, the Department of Justice has been asked to examine antitrust issues in the meat industry, according to President Trump. The inquiry will look at the divergence between cash cattle prices and prices consumers pay for beef in stores. A Justice Department spokesperson confirmed that the president had asked the department to probe antitrust issues in the meat processing industry. The statement from the president comes as attorney generals from the states of Iowa, North Dakota, Colorado, Missouri, Montana, Arizona, Idaho, Minnesota, Nebraska, South Dakota, and Wyoming all made a similar plea to the Department of Justice. Meantime, U.S. meat plants are starting to reopen. USDA Secretary Sonny Perdue said in remarks at the White House, he said, and quoting him here, "I think we have turned the corner based on the commonality of uniform standards." He went on to say, in his words, "We see these plants coming back online, obviously because of some infected employees. They will not be full force for a while, but we think that the stores will be, and you will see more variety and more meat cases fully supplied," in the Secretary's words. Asked for a timeline for all of that to happen, the Secretary predicted probably a week to 10 days when it is fully back up. A bipartisan group of 24 senators have asked President Trump to reject a recent request by 5 governors to waive renewable fuel standard volumes in light of the economic standstill during the COVID-19 pandemic shutdown. In an April 15th letter to the EPA, the governors of Texas, Utah, Oklahoma, Wyoming, and Louisiana said refiners in their states face a financial burden as a result of oil market disruptions caused by the economic shutdowns around the world. In a letter to the president yesterday, the senators urged the administration to reject that and all calls to waive the RFS. Among those 24 senators signing the letter was Jerry Moran of Kansas. During the COVID-19 crisis, about half of all ethanol plants have idled production, while many others have cut production. That has led to numerous layoffs as a result of falling gasoline demand. Waiving the RFS would cause further harm to the U.S. economy, especially our most vulnerable rural communities, the senators wrote. They went on to write, the recent requests for a waiver of the RFS are unjustified and clearly do not satisfy the rigorous requirements necessary for EPA consideration, as the letter read. The USDA is investing millions of dollars now to boost Internet access in rural communities in parts of Kansas and Oklahoma. Here's more from the USDA's Stephanie Ho.
USDA is investing $71 million to provide broadband service in unserved and underserved rural areas in Kansas and Oklahoma.
These are very vitally important programs, and we want to do our best at USDA to make sure that we're getting the best value for the dollar. Ag
Secretary Sonny Perdue announced the awards as part of the Reconnect pilot program. Overall, the funds are going to 4 projects that will bring 800 miles of fiber to 4,200 households.
These can be really life-changing type of access here, almost like the electrification that you talked about coming to the country. So it's not a luxury anymore. We've seen the pandemic has showed us the necessity of this connectivity.
This is Stephanie Ho for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Now, this award will extend broadband availability to 8,100 residents, 20 farms, and 15 businesses in Montgomery and Chautauqua counties in southeast Kansas, as well as Rogers, Nowata, Washington, and Osage counties in northeast Oklahoma. Just like countless other events, the 2020 Hard Winter Wheat Tour of Kansas and surrounding states was canceled because of the coronavirus situation. However, the next best thing is coming up, a virtual wheat tour taking place soon. Marcia Boswell has more on this week's Kansas Wheat Scoop.
There's always a lot of interest in the quality of the U.S. hard red winter wheat crop during the Wheat Quality Tour, held annually during the first week of May. This tour, held for the past 50 years by the Wheat Quality Council, aims to give a snapshot in time of the crop to those who attend, including international buyers, wheat farmers, flour millers, and others in the wheat industry. For many, this tour is their first time to step foot in a wheat field. Unfortunately, with the uncertainty of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Winter Wheat Quality Tour was canceled for the 2020 crop year. Others in the industry are making plans to host a virtual wheat tour during the week of May 18th. While it will be based loosely on the previous tours, there will be no caravans of cars traveling across wheat country. Alternatively, we will be working with certified crop advisors, extension agents, elevators, farmers, and others in the field to make observations of the crop during that week. The virtual tour will be held via Zoom. Speakers include Aaron Harries, Vice President of Research and Operations for Kansas Wheat, Dr. Romulo Lulato, Wheat and Forages Production Specialist with Kansas State University, and Jeannie Falk-Jones, Multi-County Specialist at the Northwest Research Extension Center of Kansas State University. The virtual tour will open Monday afternoon, May 18th at 4 p.m. with an orientation and comments from industry representatives. Harries will provide an overview of crop conditions and this year's yield formula provided by USDA National Agricultural Statistics Service. The formula will not be available prior to that time. Representatives from K-State Research and Extension will discuss this year's crop and talk about weather challenges it has faced, including drought and freeze injury, and what to look for when identifying freeze loss. They will also go over disease pressure that participants may be seeing in the fields. Data will be gathered Tuesday throughout crops in north central and northwest Kansas. The Day 1 wrap-up meeting Tuesday afternoon at 4 p.m. will go over the observations from those areas and provide an estimated yield potential using the formula provided by USDA NASS. Day 2 will continue through west central and southwest Kansas, and Day 3 will focus on south central and central Kansas. Daily wrap-ups will be provided each afternoon at 4 p.m., with a final crop discussion Thursday afternoon, May 21st. Virtual tour participants will use the hashtag WheatTour20 on Twitter. Interested persons can get the schedule and sign up to receive invitations to the Zoom discussions at kswheat.com/virtual tour. The tour will be hosted by Kansas Wheat and K-State Research and Extension in conjunction with the Kansas Department of Agriculture and other industry partners. For Kansas Wheat, I'm Marcia Boswell.
Many thanks, Marcia, and we'll return in a moment on Agriculture Today.
Social distancing slows the spread of coronavirus, so if you have a fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath, call your healthcare provider before going in. More info at coronavirus.gov. Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Up for you now on Agriculture Today, Kansas agricultural weather with climatologist Mary Knapp of K-State Research and Extension. Let's start with the latest and updated drought monitor for Kansas, Mary, where, and this has been coming, you could see it, extreme drought has now been declared for part of southwest Kansas.
Right. It's on the Colorado border now, and Hamilton, Stanton County areas are into that extreme drought. The other parts of the southwest Kansas area are not going to be very far behind. Yesterday, western Kansas saw very little in the way of moisture during the major part of the day, and temperatures were up into the 80s. In contrast, eastern Kansas had low, cloudy, drizzly weather, and our highs stayed below 60. So, again, quite a bit of difference between that. And, of course, that temperature will affect the demand. The unfortunate thing was they didn't escape some severe weather, and so we had a number of areas that had reports of hail and fairly large hail. One of our Kokoros observers in Comanche County reported quarter to golf ball size hail for 30 minutes. Wow. And another unfortunate in Clark County reported brief hail, but it was very large stones. They squeezed a whole 3/100 of an inch of precipitation out of that hailstorm. So not much to offset the deficits that they've developed.
Yeah. And we've a fair chunk of western Kansas beyond the southwest still in that abnormally dry range.
Right. Most of the western half of the state actually is in that abnormally dry. And in the southwest, we've got some moderate to severe drought to go along with the extreme drought. So it really is a very unfortunate situation out in western Kansas. And Another problem, if you will, or feature of it is that while we might have some subsoil moisture due to the late planting and other issues with getting the wheat crop established, the roots are having difficulty getting down to that subsoil moisture. The top 4 inches is fairly dry, and the fact that you've got moisture at 20 inches doesn't really matter.
But on the other hand, eastern Kansas is fairly well set for moisture to the point of planting delays here and there, Mary.
Right. Southeast and east central are probably the areas that are facing the biggest difficulty with getting in and doing field work. A lot of corn did get planted over the week. The big question will be, how cool does the weather get this weekend, and what kind of issues is that going to create?
In fact, it's fairly crisp in parts of Kansas today, and let's get right into that. Just how low will temperatures go? Will we see frost out there the next couple of evenings, Mary?
Well, the frost is definitely a possibility, and particularly if you're looking at low-lying areas. An example, our corning station right now, the dew point is 34. In absence of any moderating air mass moving in, that dew point gives you a good indication of just how low temperatures could go. And, 34 is not too far from frost. Hiawatha has a dew point right now of 33. So again, another signal that cold air could drop pretty low. And again, if you've got open fields or if you're in a low-lying area, those temperatures could drop a little bit further than what's being seen at the stations.
Could we see similar temperatures further south in the state, though, as the weekend unfolds?
It could penetrate further south, not quite as likely as in the northern areas of the state. If that cold air pushes far enough west, you could see some of those low temperatures in the western areas of the state. It will be easier for those temperatures to drop in the western areas where we're having that drier air in place. That allows temperatures to fluctuate more rapidly. Down in the southeast, where you've got a lot of humidity, a lot of moisture, takes a lot of energy to drop that air that extra couple of degrees, simply because most of that energy will go into evaporation or precipitation rather than dropping the air temperature. But out west, again, it's very dry. They've had already just about everything that you don't want to have happen to your wheat crop, and we'll hope that the temperatures don't get too rough.
Now, for those drier areas, there may be some positive news. As you look at next week's forecast, it's to be, you say, a generally wet week, and in fact that could reach those areas that have been hurting so badly for moisture.
Right. The Climate Prediction Center's outlook for the 6 to 10 day period, which basically carries us through the 17th of May, favors above normal moisture from the southwest corner all the way eastward. That's a fairly strong signal, a little bit lighter signal, but still above normal moisture for the northwest corner. So that would be at least some benefit. When we look at the quantitative precip forecast for the next week, there's moisture out there, but not necessarily huge amounts. The outlook is for somewhere around 1/4 of an inch to maybe as much as 1/2 an inch in the southwest corner. West central northwest will be on the lighter side, 1/10 to 1/4. But once you get as far east as, say, Salina area, the amounts start raising quite a bit. That area may see 3/4 of an inch to an inch. Southeast, which could actually do with the dry spell, may see as much as 3 inches of rain, which is, again, not needed in that area. They'd like to flip that map and have that out west and not in the eastern part of the state. But unfortunately, that's what currently is on the docket for next week.
And again, the cooler temperatures to stick around for a few days, you say?
Yeah, next week we're not really looking at particularly warm temperatures. It may get back more to the seasonal temperature pattern. Again, it's going to be spottier precip out in the west, but we'll take what we can get and hopefully avoid any severe weather with it.
Well, it's to be a conventional, active spring week coming up, it sounds, Mary, and we appreciate the briefing. Thanks for the time and the input, and enjoy your weekend.
Thanks, Eric. You as well.
Climatologist Mary Knapp, K-State Research and Extension, with the very latest on the Kansas agricultural weather scene for us, rounding out this Friday edition. And we appreciate you tuning in as well. Enjoy your weekend. Likewise, Eric Atkinson here for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.